The Federalist Papers, a series of essays that favor the ratification of the United States' new Constitution. In this video, we are going to become acquainted with the minds of our authors, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, the mastermind Federalists that turned America toward the adoption of a new Constitution, with a total of 85 essays, as read by Nikita Kumar. To start off, I'm going to be reading an abstract that I wrote about the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay published a series of essays that supported the ratification of a new United States Constitution. Following the Revolutionary War, the sovereign states questioned the legitimacy and desire for a new national government that would restrict civilians. The three Federalists concocted 85 essays published in New York newspapers to get the civilians to favor ratifying the Constitution at an upcoming convention. Under the pseudonym Publius, the authors reflected on the inevitable doom of the Articles of Confederation due to the lack of governance it provided. The collection of essays focused on the importance of a union, the separation of powers, and a strong federal government. The men convinced the people and the New York delegates to approve the ratification, expressing the importance of government and branches within to provide a stable and safe country. These men enforced the doubts of many civilians and invalidated anti-Federalist issues. The first Federalist mastermind behind the Federalist Papers was, in fact, Alexander Hamilton. Born in British West Indies, and he became an orphan because his mom died and his father left. He's sent to America's mainland with the help of locals who raised money, and he is one of the founding fathers known for his work in the Revolutionary War, like the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Yorktown. He's a New York delegate at the Constitutional Convention and studies law, and that's where he makes a 6-hour speech for a strong central government and wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers. Up next, we have James Madison. He joined the Virginia militia in December of 1774 and supported the American-French alliance. He was also on the Council of Correspondence with France. He was Virginia's delegate at the Constitutional Convention and wanted a three-part government with a legislative, executive, and judicial branch, as well as checks and balances. He wrote 29 of the 85 Federalist Papers. The final Federalist mastermind was John Jay. He went to King's College, also known as Princeton, in 1764 and became a lawyer. And soon he became New York State's Chief Justice and helped to write the state constitution. Later on in his career, he travels to Spain to gain independent support, and then France with Ben Franklin. And out of the 85 Federalist Papers, he wrote a whopping 5. Thesis. The authors behind the Federalist Papers attempted to persuade the 13 newly freed states to stay together with ratification of a constitution that outlined a separation of powers in a federal form of government and a setup a republic for democracy. So what was the original plan? The original plan was made by Hamilton to create a series of anonymous essays and articles under the alias Publius. The three men would then create 25 essays collectively in 6 months before the Constitutional Convention. Of course, however, they superseded this with 85 essays. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the fact that both James Madison and John Jay did still play a very important role in the Federalist Papers. Creating 29 essays and 5 essays is still a lot of essays. However, comparatively, Hamilton's 51 outweighs them in a sense that he did put more effort and the fact that it was his plan to begin with. So the real purpose of this papers was that Hamilton realized that most of the people against the new Constitution were just because they were afraid that it was going to take more power away from them and the states, thus reducing their freedom. So these men focused on explaining exactly what each part of the Constitution meant, and I mean every single little thing. They put it so that even the common man could read this and understand what was going on. In this way, the essays served to educate as well as persuade citizens that the Constitution should be ratified, and not just the higher classes. They wanted everyone to know this. Federalist Papers called for the outlining of 3 main points: the importance of a union and staying unified in the situation, the separation of powers which made the 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, and the government's federal strength, meaning taxing and state laws versus national laws. So, what was the importance of the Union? Basically to protect America against foreign force and influence, essentially like Britain. We do go to war with Britain in the end sooner, but it basically made it so that we were a stronger unit and not just single individual countries against a big main power. We also had the advantages on our economy and government with the ideas that a bigger unit will make more money as a total than smaller units. And the need for a bigger army and navy, self-explanatory. When we come together, we have more people, we have more supplies, we have more money. Also, keep in mind that Hamilton does become the Secretary of Treasury in the future, so this just provides more money. The second idea was the separation of powers. First, they established a checks and balance system. In this checks and balance system, we have three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch has a bicameral House and Senate, so that means that the House was based on population and the Senate was 2 per state for representation, because they wanted representation of the states, of course. Next, we have the idea that by putting in these balances, we have the executive could veto Congress, which is our House and our Senate. Our Congress could override that veto if it had a majority, and that the judicial branch could declare a law unconstitutional and void, basically establishing that no one power has too much power because the others are in line to keep them in check. Up next, we have the federal government's strength. To start off with, we have taxation. A big issue with the colonies under British rule was that they didn't want to pay taxes because they felt there was no representation, hence why we have a government now that represents it. Big issue, moral of the story, the guys are like, yo, we need to be taxed. We can't afford, our government won't have money, our army or navy won't have money, we won't be able to do anything if we don't have this taxing. And they basically established that it would be low taxes, but there would be some taxes. Then we have delegated versus concurrent versus reserved. Essentially, delegated powers are the national government's powers, concurrent powers are shared powers between the state and the government, and then reserved powers is anything that's not listed under delegated or concurrent. So they have to have some rules and regulations, of course, so specific things like declaring war, maintaining armed forces, regulating trade, post offices, standard weight and measure, coins, money, foreign policy, that's all delegated. Basically established that they need the government's help for foreign ideas, so it shouldn't be too complicated. As well as concurrent powers, which are both of them, so taxes actually fell under that. Money from banks and charter banks, establishing courts, public welfare, taxes, criminals, and then anything that wasn't mentioned fell under, essentially, the reserve powers. Basically, the point of the federal government's strength was to establish more power than in the Articles of Confederation without having too much power that it seemed like a monarchy. So every document, any reading you will ever have in your entire life will have some type of criticism. One of the biggest criticisms with the Federalist Papers was that there was no Bill of Rights. Hamilton really did believe that the Constitution would limit people by having a Bill of Rights, and that would lead to more opposition. Another loose issue is that the states were united because unification was key, but very loosely, and that every state interpreted it differently depending on what they wanted at the time, their purpose, all of that. And we see that in the Civil War with the South versus the North and their interpretations of property and slavery. The final thing was that it was really risky going from a monarchy, which had a very strong central government under Britain, to another very strong central government that we now call democracy. See, Americans didn't know where the fine line was between a monarchy and democracy if they both had very similar structures and very similar powers. Of course, it worked out in the end, and we are here in America today, but right in this moment, it was not a very strong, good idea.